Hey everybody, this video is called Remember the Wanderings, and tonight we're going to continue our pass-through study here in the book of Deuteronomy, looking at the second chapter, where we're going to see Moses reflecting on the desert years and the march toward Canaan. And so Deuteronomy chapter 2 verse 1 through 7, it starts out, "Then we turned and journeyed into the wilderness of the way of the Red Sea, as the Lord spoke to me, and we skirted Mount Seir for many days. And the Lord spoke to me, saying, You have skirted this mountain long enough. Turn northward and command the people, saying, You are about to pass through the territory of your brethren, the descendants of Esau, who live in Seir, and they will be afraid of you. Therefore watch yourselves carefully. Do not meddle with them, for I will not give you any of their land. No, not so much as one footstep, because I have given Mount Seir to Esau as a possession. You shall buy food from them with money, that you may eat, and you shall buy water from them with money, that you may drink. For the Lord your God has blessed you in all work of your hand. He knows you're trudging through this great wilderness. These 40 years the Lord your God has been with you, and you have lacked nothing." So in chapter 2 here, through verse 23, it deals with the encounters of Israel's relatives, the Edomites, the Moabites, and the Ammonites. And this section is going to reflect back on the book of Numbers in chapters number 20 and 21. But here it reflects on 21 verse 4 after spending a very long time at Kadesh. And the Israelites set out once again at the command of the Lord that came through Moses. And Israel spent many days wandering in the vicinity of Mount Seir, which is a mountain range in Edom, south of the Dead Sea, and it expanded down the eastern side of the Arabah. And many Bibles, especially if you use a study Bible, you're going to see maps of stuff. And it's, pretty cool to look at maps and look at ancient times when this happened through today with geographical. And so when Israel departed Kadesh, they were moving opposite direction of the promised land until the Lord commanded them to turn northward to the promised land. And the Edomites, they refused passage to Israel back in Numbers chapter 20 verse 14 through 21. And when we look at verse 8 next, it's going to show how Israel moved around Edom. And God had granted the descendants of Esau an inheritance. And so verse 8 through 15, it says, "And when we passed beyond our brethren, the descendants of Esau, who dwell in Seir, away from the road of the plain, away from Ethath and Ezion Geber, we turned and passed by way of the wilderness of Moab. Then the Lord said to me, Do not harass Moab, nor contend with them in battle, for I will not give you any of their land as in possession, but I have given Ar to the descendants of Lot as a possession. The Emim had dealt there many times past, a people as great and numerous, as tall as the Anakim. They also were regarded as giants like the Anakim, but the Moabites called them Emim. And the Horites formerly dwelt in Seir, but the descendants of Esau dispossessed them and destroyed them from before them, and dwelt in their place, just as Israel did to their land of their possession, which the Lord gave them. Now rise and cross over the valley of the Zered." So we crossed over the valley of the Zered, and the time we took to come from Kadesh Barnea until we crossed over the valley of the Zered was 38 years, until all the generation of the men of war was consumed from the midst of the camp, just as the Lord sworn to them. For indeed the hand of the Lord was against them to destroy them from the midst of the camp until they were consumed. So Elath and Ezion Geber were two towns that were located just north of the Gulf of Aqaba. And Israel, they passed from the east of Edom and the east of Moab on their journey northward. And the Emim was a Moab term which meant terrible ones. And they were numerous, and they were tall people who occupied the land of Moab before the Moabites did. And the Horites were Hurrians, a people who lived various places of Syria and Palestine. And those living in Seir were displaced by the descendants of Esau. And Zerad was a brook that ran into the Dead Sea from the southeast. And unlike their disobedience with Kadesh, Israel obeyed the command to cross over the brook. And then you see 38 years of failure at Kadesh to the obedience at Zerad. And the rebellious generation denied access to the promised land. They had died off just as God had promised. In verse 16 through 23, so it was when all the men of war had finally perished from among the people that the Lord spoke to me, saying, this day you are to cross over at Ar, the boundary of Moab. And when you come near the people of Ammon, do not harass them or meddle with them, for I will not give you any of the land of the people of Ammon as a possession, because I have given it to the descendants of Lot as a possession. That was also regarded as a land of giants. Giants formerly dwelt there, but the Ammonites called them Zamzummim, a people as great and numerous and as tall as the Anakim. But the Lord destroyed them before them, and they were dispossessed them and dwelt in their place, just as he had done for the descendants of Esau who dwelt in Seir when he destroyed the Horites from being before them. They dispossessed them and dwelt in their place even to this day. And the Avim who dwelt in villages as far as Gaza, the Caphtorim who came from Caphtor, destroyed them and dwelt in their place. Rise, take your journey and cross over the river Arnon. Look, I have given into your hand Sihon, the Amorite, king of Heshbon, and his land. Begin to possess and engage him in battle. So verses 15 through 23, or 16 through 23, Moses reflects going through the land of the Amorites. And as with the Moabites and the Edomites, the land of the Amorites was also not for the people of Israel. And Zamzummim was an Ammonite term that was used to describe their forefathers in the land. And they were as tall as the Anakim, but the Lord destroyed them, and he given the land over to the Ammonites. And this was an encouragement for Israel to witness, as they know that God could also defeat the Anakim in the land of Canaan. And they had reason to know that God would give them the land. And the Avim was an ancient village dwellers of southwestern Palestine along the Mediterranean coast as far as the city of Gaza. And the Caphtorim probably referred to Crechi and may reference an early Philistine group from that island that invaded the coast of Palestine and defeated the Avim and then dwelt there. And these Caphtorim were ancestors to the later and the greater Philistine invasion that happens in 1200 BC, a couple hundred years after the book of Deuteronomy is written. In verse 24 through 37, rise, take your journey and cross over the river Arnon. Look, I have given into your hand Sihon, the Amorite king of Heshbon, and his land. Begin to possess it and engage him in battle. This day I will begin to put the dread of and fear over upon the nations under the whole heaven, who shall hear the report of you and shall tremble and be in anguish because of you. And I sent messengers from the wilderness of Kedemoth to Sihon, king of Heshbon, with words of peace, saying, let me pass through your land. I will keep strictly to the road, and I will turn neither to the right nor to the left. You shall sell me food for money, but I may eat, and give me water for money, that I may drink. Only let me pass through on foot, just as the descendants of Esau, who dwelt in Seir, and the Moabites who dwelt in Ar, did for me, until I crossed the Jordan into the land which the Lord our God has given us. But Sihon, king of Heshbon, would not let us pass through, for the Lord your God hardened his spirit and made his heart obstinate, that he might deliver him into your hand as it is this day. And the Lord said to me, See, I have begun to give Sihon and his land over to you. Begin to possess it, that you may inherit his land. Then Sihon and all his people came out against us to fight at Jahaz, and then the Lord our God delivered him over to us, so we defeated him and his sons and all his people. We took all his cities at that time, and we utterly destroyed the men, women, and little ones of every city. We left nothing remaining. We took only the livestock as plunder for ourselves with the spoil of the cities which we took from Or, which is on the bank of the river Arnon, and from the city that is in the ravine, as far as Jalad. There was not one city too strong for us. The Lord our God delivered all of us. Only you did not go near the land of the people of Ammon, anywhere along the Jordan, Jabbok, or to the cities of the mountains, or wherever the Lord our God has forbidden us. So from this point on through the next chapter, Moses continues the historic survey detailing the defeat of the two Amorite kings, Sihon and Og, and the takeover of their territory. And Moses, in these verses, they reflect the journey of Sihon. And the river Arnon was the northern boundary of Moab. And Israel was allowed to attack Sihon because the Amorites were not relatives of Israel. And the journey begins, and God put the fear of Israel into the hearts of their enemies. In Kedemoth, it means eastern regions, and it's likely a few miles north of the Arnon River, near the eastern border of the Amorite state. And just like with the Edomites, Moses asked that Sihon would peacefully allow them to proceed through their territory. But Sihon, in his conscious will, he refused Israel's request to journey through his land. And God confirmed what was already in Sihon's heart, and that was arrogance against the Lord and God's people. And so with Sihon's heart being hardened, it created the grounds for the defeat of him in battle, and for God to give the land over to Israel. And Jahaz was the place of battle between Sihon and the Israelites, which is likely a few miles to the north of Kedemoth. And so we see in the passage here in Deuteronomy 2 that God hardened Sihon's heart. And so to wrap up here, we see that Moses is reflecting the journey through the land of Edom. And do you know who the most famous Edomite was in the New Testament? And I almost want to play the Jeopardy tone right here, but I don't have that in the background for you. But it was Herod the Great. And Israel was to treat the Edomites with respect, though Israel was to dominate over them. And it gives a picture of how we ought to treat others, of those who are weaker than us, with respect, especially those in the faith. And it reminds me of the passage in Romans 14 with the weaker brother, that the Apostle Paul teaches us that the weaker brother we need to respect and, not beat down on them. And then so Moses also reflects the journey through Moab here. And who was one of the most famous Moabite women in the Old Testament? And it's the book of Ruth, not Luke, the book of Ruth. And we'll be going through the book of Ruth probably later on in the summertime. And Moses reflects the nations they encountered on their way to Canaan, such as the Ammonites and King Sihon's territory. In Numbers, it didn't cover the details of King Sihon's heart being hardened. However, we see in Deuteronomy 2 that God hardened his heart. And God has the right to do it because God is the creator, and he has the right to do whatever he wills over his creation. And God is the potter and we are the clay, just as the Apostle Paul says in Romans 9 when he's speaking on God's sovereignty over men. And God led Sihon not into destructive course that his heart desired, so that the land, or God led Sihon into the destructive course that his heart desired, so that the land of the Amorites became the land and the inheritance, the possession of Israel. And God did not have to persuade a reluctant Sihon to act out against Israel. He let Sihon's heart play itself out, because the heart is the most wicked, it's the most deceitful thing, as the prophet Jeremiah later says. And what you see here is that God didn't have to take King Sihon's heart, that was a good heart, and turn it bad for his will to be accomplished. King Sihon's heart, as already stated, was already desperately wicked. And that's going to wrap up this video, as we're going to look next tomorrow at reflecting on the march to Canaan, and then we're going to look at Joshua's appointment. So I hope you have a great rest of your night, and God bless. We'll be on here tomorrow.